Morning students, welcome back again to my classroom. In the last class, we saw Canadian history. So, the Canadian history starts from the indigenous population, the Eskimos. Eskimos are the indigenous people, who are the original peoples of Canada. But when the European people, settlers, entered, when the European settlers entered Canada, uh, the Eskimos or the Canadian indigenous people group were faded away. There were very few people, very few Eskimos living in Canada. When it was occupied or it was conquered by the French colonization, in 15th century, around 15th century, French and English, they fought for them. Parts of now called Canada was North America. So the fight was going between French and England for the North America, now Quebec. So in the victory, French occupied the North America or now Quebec. But when it lost the war in the 7 Year War, it gave away the North America or now Quebec to England and left the land. After England took the position, it it separated the Quebec into Upper and Lower Canada, and later it was reunified, and two more provinces were added to the Upper and Lower part of Canada. And what happened later, when Canada was given freedom or it was given independence, it was given a constitutional. The England remained constitutional monarchy, but was given parliamentary democracy. At present, Canada has 10 provinces. So this is what we saw in the last class. Now, today we will see what is Canadian literature. Come, let us start our class, our discussion about Canadian literature. Canadian literature. Canadian literature starts with Indigenous literature. So, as I said in the early class, Indigenous people are the people who are the people who are uh, who, who are the original peoples of the land. Indigenous people are the original peoples of the land, and these people they are culturally diverse, which means they had different cultures, and each group had their own literature, language, and culture, and hence to group the literature of indigenous people, it is very difficult. So the Canadian literature, indigenous literature, is difficult to prove, and we don't have historical record of this literature of these indigenous people. So when the literature starts. So as I said earlier, in the history of Canada, French occupies in around 15th century. So the French Canadian literature is the first literature of this land. The rise of Quebec patriotism and the 1837 Lower Canada Rebellion led to the rise of French Canadian fiction. This is the most two important events that rise to the that led to the writing of fiction, that is French Canadian fiction, and L influenced Duan Livre by Philippe-Ignace-Francois Aubert de Gaspé is the first widely regarded first French Canadian novel. Later, the genres which first became popular were the rural novel and the historical novel. So later, the French novelists started writing historical and uh, other rural novels based in the stories were based on rural stories and historical events were put together to write novels. In 1866, Father Henri-Raymond Casgrain became one of Quebec's first literary theorists. So authors like Louis-Honoré, Fréchette, and Arthur Buies wrote more interesting works. And these writers were French writers, and they wrote in French, and they are grouped under French Canadian literature. This pattern continued until 1930s. A new group of authors from the University of Laval and Université de Montréal, a French spelling, they started to write novels of psychological and sociological foundation. So you can see after 1930s, the French uh, people, a French novelist, who were educated in two universities, that is University of Laval and University de Montreal. They started to write different types of novel, namely psychological and sociological novel. Early there were only historical novels and some rural novels, so stories based on rural. But after 1930s, the French Canadian literature was filled with psychological and sociological novels. Gabrielle Roy and Annie Hébert were important writers in writing psychological and sociological novels. During this period, Quebec theatre became far more involved. So, Quebec theatre was found during this period. French Canadian literature began to greatly expand with the turmoil of the Second World War and the beginnings of industrialization in 1950s and the Quit Revolution in 1960s. In the year 1950s and 60s, what happened is that after the Second World War and the industrialization, what happened is that the French Canadian literature they started to expand greatly. Many novels, many dramas, many short stories were written during this period. French Canadian literature also began to attract globally, with Acadian novelist Antonin Milliet winning the Prix Goncourt Award. So, the French Canadian novel literature was raised to the world platform by the novelist named Antonin Millet. He was awarded the Prix Goncourt Award, and as a result, the French Canadian literature was taken to this world stage. Canada, when it became official country in a country as official in 1867, the literature written. So what happened is, after Canada became officially independent in 1867, uh, the literature was grouped into two: literature written during the French occupation and literature written after the French occupation, or literature written after the colonization. These are the two literature was grouped as separated into two types: literature before colonization and after colonization. For example, the literatures of Susanna Modi, Catherine Partride, these writers, they recorded the experience as pioneers in their novels called Partride's The Backwoods of Canada and Canadian Crusoes, and Modi's Roughing It in the Bush and Life in the Clearing. All these novels, they expressed the post-colonial experiences in their novel. Moreover, their books often dealt with the survival and the rugged Canadian environment. These themes reappear in other Canadian works, including Margaret Atwood's Survival. Moreover, these writers, the writer Susanna Modi, Catherine Bartray, and all these writers, they started to describe the Canadian environment or the bush Canadian environment in their novel. And Margaret Atwood, the contemporary writer, also you can see this environmental description even in the novels of Margaret Atwood's survival. However, one of the earliest Canadian writers included in the Canadian literary anthology is Thomas Candler Halibut, who died just before 2 years of Canada's official independence. Now, this writer is remembered for his comic character Sam Slick, who appeared in the novel Clockmaker and other humorous works throughout the Hillburton's life. After 1867, after the World War II, writers such as Mavis Gallant, Mordecai Richard, Norman Lively, Margaret Lawrence, and Irving Laytall added to the modernist influence to Canadian literature. They are the modern writers of Canadian literature. Now, coming to contemporary Canadian literature after 1967, the best known living Canadian writer, internationally acknowledged or internationally well known figure is Margaret Atwood. He is well known novelist, poet, literary critic. Some great 20th century Canadian authors include Margaret Lawrence and Gabrielle Roy. Alice Munro, poet laureate Alice Munro, is most important Canadian writer who was given Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 2030, who took Canadian literature to a greater height. So, Lord Alice Munro elevated Canadian literature to the world stage, and Lord Alice Munro elevated Canadian literature to the world stage. So, other major Canadian novelists include Coral Shields, Lawrence Hill, and Alice Munro. Coral Shields' novel The Stone Diaries won the Pulitzer Award for fiction, and another novel, Laurie's Party, won Orange Prize in 1998. Lawrence Hill's Book of Negroes won the 2008 Commonwealth Writers' Prize overall Best Book Award, while Alice Munro became the first Canadian to win the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 2013. Munro also received Man Booker International Prize in the year 2009. In the year 1960, Canadian poets included Margaret Atwood, Michael Ondaatje, Leonard Cohen, Ellen Mandel, and Margaret Avishon. They produced some of the most best work during the period. A notable anthology of Canadian poetry is the New Oxford Book of Canadian Verse. It was edited by Margaret Atwood. Annie Carson is probably the best known Canadian poet living today. Carson in 1996 won Lannan Literary Award for Poetry. Some of the Canadian authors who have won international awards are Alice Munro, 2013, won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and she also won. She is also a Man Booker International Prize in the year 2009. Man Booker Prize include other Canadian authors Michael Ondaatje, Margaret Atwood, and Jan Martel, The Life of Pi. Yeah, it was filmed. It was published in the year 2002 and it was filmed. Jan Martel's The Life of Pi was filmed. Margaret Atwood's Testaments. Coral Shields won Pulitzer Prize for fiction for his fiction The Stone Diaries, and he also won National Book Critics Circle Award for the same book. International Dublin Literary Award was given to Alistair MacLeod for his book No Great Mischief, Ravihage de Miro's Game. An Orange Prize was given to Annie Michaels and Fugitive Pieces. For his Fugitive Pieces. Carol Shields' Larry's Party was published in the year 1998, and Commonwealth Writers' Prize was given to Olive Sr. for his Summer Lighting. Mordecai Richard for his Solomon Gusik was here. Rohinton Mysteries, Such a Long Journey, A Fine Balance, and Aston Clark's The Polished Hoe, Lawrence Gill, The Book of Negroes are most important contemporary Canadian novels. Peace Prize for German Book Trade was won by Margaret Atwood in the year 2017. Sorry. This is all about a brief Canadian literary history. So, in the next class, we will talk about Margaret Atwood life and works of Margaret Atwood. Thank you, dear students. Thank you for watching the video.